shopping cannot find very many deals. We're just going to have to eat less. We're going to have to do things. We can't drive as much. Maybe we won't take as long a vacation this summer. Maybe we'll just stay back at the house, and maybe we'll sell our car and maybe get a moped. But this is the new America. Think about it.
Hey, you new to the area or just want to know about the best hidden gems and upcoming events? Stay tuned. Be Local Buzz with Devin takes you to these places, introduces you to the best businesses, and tells you about upcoming buzz. Preset your radio to Tan Talk 1340 AM or 106.1 FM every Thursday from 4 to 5. That is the Be Local Buzz with Devin on Tan Talk 1340 AM and 106 FM every Thursday from 4 to 5. Looking forward to speaking with you.
Hey, Tan Talk listeners, get your calendars out because Senior Voice America is going to an every morning format from 8 to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. Your hosts, Tim Bryce and Berkeley Badger, shall have even more time to discuss politics, religion, finance, and health. So set your dials, you early bird seniors, and join the call-in party every morning, 8 to 10 a.m. on your Tan Talk Radio Network. SBA, improving your day.
Are you a writer, inventor? Do you have questions about your intellectual property rights? Well, tune in every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 11 o'clock for Joy on Paper. Once a month, I will have a special guest, the writer's legal eagle, Bill Larson of Larson & Larson, who can answer your questions. Protect your valuable work. Email me your questions to patsy.radio@gmail.com and then listen in every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 a.m. right here on Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network. That's patsy.radio@gmail.com.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
Simple as it is, conservatives never get the Second Amendment quite right. And that's not by accident. We'll explain right now on The Voice of Reason.
You are about to enter the arena of real news and factual commentary on The Voice of Reason here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Now, here are your hosts for today's program, Ed Golly and Joe Reinhardt.
I must be an idiot, Joe. I come on the radio and talk about how dumb I am because I don't need to get a moped. I don't need to curtail my driving. Since I drive an EV charged by solar panels, I drive all I want. My fuel is free, unlimited, and 100% clean. Boy, do I feel like an idiot.
You're going to go to work for Uber, huh? I trust.
I just saw today in the paper that the Bloomberg New Energy Finance projects that more than half of new car and truck sales will be all electric by 2040. And that's because by 2035, the major automakers of the world will stop producing internal combustion engine driven cars. Not by government mandate. I don't know who this they are that want us to drive EVs. The customers want to buy them and they see it coming. And why would you buy cars that you can't sell? Because electric vehicles are the way that we're going to get around in the future because they are the 21st century vehicles. And as far as the grid not being able to support all these cars, that's not going to be a problem either because they aren't all going to come on the road overnight, right? If you drive up I-75, it's very rare to pass an electric vehicle. Most of them driving around town.
Well, it's like making the argument in 1903 that we don't have enough gasoline to run these cars.
Exactly.
Which are multiplying exponentially.
And as for charging, on Tuesday morning, they said EV charging requires 15 hours. Well, that would be maybe if you plug it into a 110 outlet. But then again, most cars spend most of their time parked. And so that's the time to charge electric vehicles. So while they're asserting that it takes far less time to fuel an internal combustion car, that's wrong because I don't spend any time charging my car. I charge it while it's parked. And every time I get in it, I've got a 190-mile range. Now, how often does anybody drive around town over 150 miles in a day?
Everything gets better. When's the last time you saw somebody have to crank their car to start it? Right? Which could break your arm, by the way, if you didn't.
If that thing kicks on you?
Yeah, if it kicked back, you didn't retard the spark. but everything gets better and smaller and cheaper. You can count on electric vehicles doing the same thing. The solar panels will get smaller and better. The batteries will get smaller and better. The charge times will go way down. I anticipate that you won't bother to charge batteries anyway. You'll just pull into a station. They'll pop in 2, 3, 4 new ones, and
batteries,
5 minutes later, and less time than it took to fill it up with gasoline, you're back on the road again, particularly since you don't have to waste time checking the oil or the radiator.
The only time I use a charge station is if I'm driving out of state, because then I won't have the range to make a 600-mile trip. And the typical charge times are anywhere from 20 to 50 minutes. So, that will make the trip longer than if I was driving a conventional internal combustion car.
I mean, you got to eat.
Yeah, and that's what I do. That's when I start going to a restaurant and have lunch while it's charging. It does add a few hours, but then again, by the time I get there, I haven't spent any money. I haven't had to spend $70 or $80 or $90 every time I stop and put fuel in it. And so the few times I do that, it's worth it to me to go ahead and make the stops. Now, last month, my electric bill was $33. Okay. 26 of that was to pay the connection fee to be on the grid so I can trade energy with the power company, right? So for a net $7 worth of electricity, I powered my house, my modest little lap pool, and the car I drive. All that energy came from the sun. So that's what's going to make us ultimately energy independent, is the fact that we don't just rely on one power station to give us all our electricity, but we'll have thousands of them in the form of either rooftop systems or big systems out in the field. If you drive up I-75, when you pass I-10, look to the left, the west side, that solar field is so big, I can't even estimate how many panels they've got in that thing. I don't know, it's 2,000 or 8,000. You just can't estimate it, so big. And if you keep going, you get about 40 miles south of Macon, there's a field that dwarfs that one. It's enormous. It's just incredible how big it is. And the other thing is, solar panels do produce power even when it's cloudy. They don't stop altogether. They produce less power, but they're still producing power even when it's overcast. So, and then the last thing I'll say is, instead of ridiculing EV drivers, they should be thanking us, because we're not buying gasoline to drive the price up, right? So as more and more of the fleet becomes electrified, that means there's going to be less demand for the available oil, which is a finite commodity, which should stabilize and ultimately reduce the price of oil for everybody worldwide. Anyway, that's our correction for today. You might not have realized it, Joe, but our country's getting safer every day. How can that be, you might ask? Didn't the murder rate soar 30% in 2020? And isn't violent crime up nearly everywhere? Isn't there, on average, more than one mass shooting of 4 or more people every day? And the answer is yes.
Yes, it is. As a matter of fact, they're 19 weeks into 2022, and we've already seen 198 mass shootings in the United States this year. The 10 people killed and the other 3 injured this weekend in Buffalo makes it the deadliest mass shooting of the year. It's also the 198th mass shooting with just over 19 weeks. This averages out to 10 attacks a week. Wow. I'd hate to travel around the country trying to attend the aftermath of, I'd hate to be, maybe a journalist. If I was putting together a book on mass shootings, I'd hate, do you imagine the travel schedule? You'd have to have 2 electric cars to keep up with that.
But see, Joe, you're overlooking the bright side of this whole equation. The sale of deadly weapons has been surging at a record pace for years, with nearly 40 million firearms sold in 2020 and 2021. Better yet, in 25 states, that's half the states, you can now legally buy and carry a firearm without a permit, without any testing, without any training. For decades, the National Rifle Association and Second Amendment absolutists have assured us that the more guns there are in our communities, the safer and more polite we'll all be. With nearly 400 million guns now in American hands, surely we must be the safest nation in the world. Remember, our population's about 330.
We're almost the safest. In 2021, we only had 693 mass shootings per the Gun Violence Archive. The year before, we saw 611, and in 2019, there were only 417. Other countries, of course, have zero.
Yeah. I keep asking, where are all the good guys with the guns to protect us from the people like the subway shooter or the grocery store shooter? I never hear of a guy pulling out a gun and shooting at them. In fact, it'd be a dangerous thing to do because when the cops show up, they think you're the shooter,
right?
And you end up getting shot. It has happened before.
And there was one instance I read about where a guy pulled out his gun and was about to shoot a guy who was, in fact, a policeman because he thought, he has a gun and better to be on the safe side than sorry. And in fact, the idea that mass shooters are insane, that they snap, and as if they're totally detached from reality is simply not the case. There's a very rational thought process that goes into planning and carrying out mass shootings. The suspect in Buffalo left behind a racist screed, donned body armor, and actually live streamed the attack and had plans for further carnage down the road if he survived or escaped this incident. That's hardly a spur of the moment.
Yeah. And as you know, our governor is lining us up to be one of the next states to introduce permitless carry laws.
Right.
So that we'll be maybe 26 or 27 or whatever. What would you do, Joe, if you're sitting in a movie theater and a guy walks in next to you with a gun on his hip or carrying an AR-15 over his shoulder? I think I'd be inclined to get up and leave. What the hell is he carrying this gun around? Is he going to shoot up the theater?
Well, I'd be inclined just to shoot the guy and watch the second half of the movie.
But who carries guns?
I'm standing my ground, you understand? He's interfering with my... I'm afraid I won't be able, just to find out who the murderer was. And so I need to make sure that I'm there for the climax. And of course, the safe way to do that, to be on the safe side, is to stand your ground first.
And you saw what was reported today up in Chicago. A 7-year-old kid had a gun in a backpack. 7 years old. I mean, is it time to...
Chicago.
Yeah. Strictest gun laws in the world. Does that tell us something?
I was born in Chicago, 1951, and my father told me, son, you better buy a gun. It's been recorded in popular music at any rate.
Jeez. So this inanimate object, as we all know, guns don't kill anybody. It always takes people. Went off in the backpack. The kid wasn't even holding it, and the bullet ricocheted and hit another kid. But I mean, isn't it time to kind of acknowledge that maybe we have a problem when we start seeing those things happen? That kids 7 years old are walking around armed? Was that the intent of the founding fathers? Was that really what they had in mind when they wrote the Second Amendment?
The Second Amendment says something about muskets. Or at least they thought they were talking about muskets.
Well, the thing about the Second Amendment is that conservatives never really quite tell us what it actually says. They always have a sort of an abbreviated assessment of it. Because remember that lying by omission is the same as lying by false statement.
Right, and it's always coupled with the idea that Democrats or liberals or progressives will do anything and everything they can to take away your guns, whether they have to pry them out of your dead cold fingers or not.
Now, not to pick on him, but I'll give you an example. Here's Ron Ogden. He's the host of the Republic of Clearwater that you hear every Wednesday at 4 here on WTAN, offering his description of the Second Amendment.
The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Period, he says. Well, that's not really where the period goes. Let's read the actual amendment. Okay, it says, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So that tells me, and we can't go back and ask these guys what they meant, but they thought we need a militia to defend ourselves from the kind of people who invaded the Capitol on January 6th, trying to take over.
A militia does not include shooting up black supermarkets.
No,
That's
and
not one of their functions. I think we can all agree on that.
isn't it really telling us that if you have you're supposed to have a gun so that if they need to assemble a militia, because we didn't have large standing armies, and we couldn't move them efficiently or quickly to wherever we might need them. So we're going to need to call up every able-bodied guy, and he needs to have a gun because we can't provide one for him.
The Revolutionary War was fought more or less by militia.
But by the time
the U.S. had no formal army.
Right. But by the time we get to the mid-1800s, 1860s, when the war between the states broke out, wasn't the government supplying the soldiers with guns and uniforms, everything they needed? And it's been that way ever since. I mean, when we invaded Iraq, W didn't say, all right, everybody who's got a gun, come over here and get in the plane. We're going to take you over there and invade Iraq. If you show up at the base because you've been drafted and you're standing in line in front of the drill sergeant on the first day, he doesn't say, show me your gun. I want to see what you brought here. They issue you a weapon, which means the Second Amendment is obsolete. It's there to provide for a military to protect the government from radicals that want to take it over or enemies that might want to invade us so that we can get an army together in time. Or maybe native people were going to attack. Who knew? It was a pretty untamed country when they first came over, and they needed those weapons to defend themselves from anything from wild animals to other countries invading cities. And that's not the case anymore. I can't. It's just incomprehensible to me that they thought, yeah, it's fine for children to be carrying around these weapons and using these military-style weapons in the general population to just shoot up churches or theaters or concerts or whatever they want.
Well, one bright note, I guess, as more and more people are beginning to clamor for gun control and regulations, something apart from just thoughts and prayers. But apparently an alternative has begun to spring up. 7 people a couple of days ago in Fall River were stabbed during a clash between motorcycle clubs in Fall River, Massachusetts. So, put away your gun and get out your shiv, because times they are changing. Yep.
Let's move on to, I don't know, protesters. This was a question I heard the other day. Which scare you more, Joe, progressive or conservative protesters, right? A few facts about protesters. Last year in 2021, 91% of all politically motivated murders in the United States were committed by people affiliated with right-wing extremism, 3% by Islamic extremism, and 6% by left-wing extremists, specifically anarchists and black nationalists. Over the past 10 years, according to the Anti-Defamation League, quote, of the 443 people killed at the hands of extremists, 75% were killed by right-wing extremists, unquote. So, these conservative protesters have been murdering abortion doctors, bombing abortion clinics, viciously harassing patients that come to those clinics.
For years.
Yeah. And now these peaceful protesters who show up at the home of the Supreme Court judges are categorized as a radical mob when all they're doing is standing there with a sign and maybe chanting. I don't see them throwing Molotov cocktails. I don't see them damaging the property or peeing on the plants or breaking windows or doing anything.
Isn't there something about the right to peaceably assemble in that article you just read?
And isn't that exactly what our governor's now trying to extinguish? He's trying to eliminate that civil liberty, along with the ability to even criticize the government. That was the headline story in today's paper.
It will be illegal to think before long.
Yeah.
You're allowed to pretend to think.
I mean, that's what Erdogan's doing over in Turkey now, right? You cannot criticize the government. And that's what the conservatives are trying to do here.
Well, that's treason.
And it'll come down to that, right? That they can sue you if you say anything critical about them. Yeah. What about that First Amendment right? I see him chipping away at it bit by bit. And of course, what's going on with the right of people to be free to make their own reproductive decisions is the beginning of this whole movement to just give the government control and allow no protest against it anymore. I remember when Trump was elected in 2016, those were the biggest protests I ever remember seeing, when millions of women in cities all over this country and in other countries in major cities were protesting by the thousands with the pink hats. And I don't remember any shots being fired, stores being looted or burned, nothing. And yet the aim of the conservatives is to eliminate those forms of protest now and say you can't protest against the government if you don't like what we're doing.
You can be indicted if there's violence just because you happen to be a member of a group. They've made it very difficult to prosecute people who just simply run over protesters if they're blocking the streets or whatever. You're in my way.
Yeah.
And for what we pay for gasoline, you ought to have the right to run over anybody.
Yeah, I mean, I just see these conservatives as fundamentally trying to change the Constitution and eliminate our civil liberties that have been so valuable to us for so many years, which would then lead to, one of several things: either the end of the republic or the empire, as we call it, or the splitting up of the country into two countries. And I hear a lot of commentators talking about that and suggesting that maybe that's the answer, because if we are so inextricably divided about how a country should be run, then maybe we need to split into two countries like we did in 1861. Maybe it's too bad we didn't just leave that alone, right? We wouldn't have all these problems today.
We still have slavery.
Yeah. Child labor.
Yeah. All the things we need.
I hear these people say, well, our country was built on oil. We need all the oil we can
Cotton
get.
would be dirt cheap.
Yeah. Our country was also built on slavery and mule-drawn plows.
Yeah.
Child labor. We aren't advocating a return to that. Let's move forward and electrify and use we can't use the hydro too much anymore, run out of water, but we still got wind. We've got solar.
At one time, they tried to pass a law making it illegal for children under 12 to work more than 12 hours a day, I think it was. And the Catholic Church came down with both feet against that law. The argument being that hard work, serfdom, if you will, forced labor tempered them for the Christian universe.
Well, that was the Mother Teresa philosophy, remember?
Yeah.
She didn't provide, with all the money that church has, the Catholic Church, did they provide any kind of health care or medical care?
No, they built more convents, etc.
Yeah.
And mostly they just stood around and wiped people's brow while they sweated and died, and then at the last moment tried to convert them.
Lying on a straw mat on a concrete floor attended by nuns who had no medical training of any kind.
And try to, look, I'm desperate, I'm dying. Okay, fine, I'll become a Catholic, I'll become a Hindu, I'll become a Zulu. I don't care, if I have it, I can't be any worse off than I am. I also like to point out that when Mother Teresa had a heart attack, which she did, right in the Vatican, luckily the Pope was there, came right down and healed her. Oh, no, wait, he didn't. He put her on a jet to the Scripps Institute in San Diego. And they, with the help of God and a good medical team, were able to cure Mother Teresa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when the doctor does the work, the imaginary God gets the credit.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's right around.
Boy, she was the most successful bagman for the Vatican in the 20th century.
Bagman is the right word.
Yes. Bag woman, Joe.
woman.
Can't we be a little bit more
Sorry.
politically correct here? I'm
Bag
just
person.
trying. Now, I have a question for you before we go to the break. The Supreme Court, I would assert that it is no longer, and maybe for most of its life never has really been, a deliberative judicial body, but rather it's strictly a political branch of the government that's utilized to promote the political agenda of whatever party of that president that appointed those judges. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. How can they be in such disagreement about interpreting our Constitution? Most decisions would come down 7-2 or 8-1, like, for example, the prayer in school decision.
Roe v.
did.
Wade,
Mhm.
Prayer in School, Brown versus Board of
Right.
Education was 8-1, I think, if not 9-zip.
Yeah, because they were more deliberative back then, and they really looked at the Constitution and decided that it gave us certain rights or restrictions of the government. But now we don't see that anymore, right? We see that it's strictly used to advance the agenda of whatever party put those judges in power. And they make the decision and then try to somehow horn that into the Constitution to justify their opinion. And they're using the Bible as a constitution instead of the Constitution. What do you have to say about that?
Well, as a matter of fact, I agree with you.
Oh, okay.
The Supreme Court, there are 6 Catholics and 3 Jews, I think. There are no atheists, no humanists, no secular, openly secular people of any description.
Mhm.
Why would you expect a different result from people who have been indoctrinated from birth to adhere to a specific dogma and to do what they are told? The number one virtue in Christianity is the willingness to submit. And Islam, I think, translates as submission. So
Wow.
it gives you an idea of what they want you to do, which is put your pants down around your ankles and wait.
Yeah. It's really remarkable. And I think that Leonard Pitts, who's a columnist for the Miami Herald, had an opinion piece published on Monday that I think really did just a superb job of expressing the issue of the protests at the residence of these Supreme Court judges. And he says, do I wish that those protests had not happened? Well, yes, I do. But he says, you know what I wish even more? I wish people did not feel so desperate as to go to that extreme. I wish they thought they had other options. I wish this court had not been rendered disreputable and functionally illegitimate by the underhanded and politically tainted means of its assemblage, meaning they stole 2 seats on the court. And I wish it were not poised to catapult this country back 50 years. I wish Mitch McConnell was not a sanctimonious liar and Susan Collins more gullible than Charlie Brown. I wish a national abortion ban were not a real possibility.
I wish they would charge those Supreme Court justices with perjury who lied under oath.
Yep. We talked about that last week.
Yes, we
They
did.
all lied under oath.
They even played the quotes.
I mean, it's getting to the point of what's the point in having confirmation hearings if they're going to sit there under oath, lie, and not be held accountable for that? Or just don't bother putting them under oath. He says, I wish legal experts were not warning that the reasoning by which Roe will likely be overturned also opens the door to striking down previous rulings that sanctioned interracial and same-sex marriage. And I wish we had a few more discussions about implicit threats when people were jostling and harassing vulnerable women outside abortion clinics. I wish we'd had them when dozens of bombings, shootings, beatings, and arsons were committed by members of a compulsory birth movement that had the temerity, with media complicity, to misname itself pro-life.
Pro-birth.
Still, there is a small consolation in last week's protests. At least the affected jurists will henceforth have one more thing in common with women seeking abortions. Now they both know what it's like to have their privacy invaded. Yeah, it's different when it's your home, but I'll bet it's also no picnic when it's your uterus. Gosh, it's really well written, and it describes exactly what's going on. The court doesn't evaluate the Constitution anymore. It's all just moving political agenda forwards without respect to the liberties guaranteed to us in the Constitution of this country. All right, I got to take a deep breath here. Oh, let me just finish by suggesting that we look at the polls too, by the way. Because in a republic, the government is supposed to really represent the will of the people unless it's something that's unconstitutional, like a lynch mob, for example. Right? Everybody democratically thinks one guy should be lynched, except the guy being lynched. All right, who protects him? Yeah, well, the Constitution protects him. 82% of Americans say abortion should be legal if a woman's health is in jeopardy. And 79% support abortion in cases of rape or incest. Incest. Not incense. Incest.
I'm incensed.
48% of respondents think abortion should be permitted when a woman cannot afford to have a child. 45% think that should be illegal. 75% of Democrats, 53% of independents, 36% of Republicans want to uphold Roe versus Wade. It's a majority. It's roughly 7 out of 10 Americans think that we shouldn't be messing with this.
It's a bipartisan majority.
Yeah. And so the logic of the judge is that since the Constitution doesn't specifically spell it out, they can decide anything they want. But that's
they're like 10 wolves and a sheep voting on what they have for dinner.
It sounds more like fascism than a republic to me. Coming up right after a very short break, our weekly Bible reading with Joe. And then the Voice of Reason will continue with more of the topics conservatives never want you to hear about.
Listen to the latest pet trends with benefits on the Pet Buzz every Saturday morning from 9 to 10 a.m. Join pet trendologist Charlotte Reed and veterinarian Dr. Michael Fleck as they talk all things pets. From animal health and wellness, money-saving tips, celebrity gossip, breaking news, and more. Their expert guests are in the know and in the now. To learn more about this unique program and its hosts, tune into the show on the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Join the Tampa St. Pete Sports Connection live from Ferg Sports Bar and Grill every Saturday from noon to 2 as we cover Tampa Bay sports, from the Pee-wees to the preps to the pros, providing a positive perspective in our weekly interviews with NFL alumni and Florida Sports Hall of Fame inductees, as well as collegiate, high school, youth coaches and players, conversations from the clubhouse, as well as entertaining guests weekly. So be sure to have a championship day with the Tampa St. Pete Sports Connection Saturdays from 12 to 2 on the Tan Talk family of stations.
Don't turn it off now. You need this stuff. Tampa Bay's Tan Talk Radio Network.
If you care to comment on our program, you may reach us by email at WTANvoice@AOL.com. And if you have any issues you'd like us to address, we'll be happy to do so on the next week's program.
And if you're having difficulty viewing us on YouTube, Tan Talk Radio has been cut off for another, I don't know how much longer. How much longer is the ban on one more week? One more week they're banned on YouTube. But you can go to YouTube and just type in Voice of Reason. And there we are in living black and white.
Well, now remember, we don't have a monopoly on that title.
Right.
Voice of Reason's
That's
all
true.
over the place.
There's a van, a band. Yeah, go to
Tan
Tan
Talk.
Talk plus Voice of Reason.
There you go.
And,
Ready for the Babel reading?
I'm ready to babble. Bible.
Sorry.
Bible, Bible. This is from Mark, the 10th chapter. I think it has some relevance to what's been happening with people dying, for one thing, and with the question about being religious and what constitutes religion. It says, I think this is right after the Sermon on the Mount, as a matter of fact, and it says, after the sermon, one boy came forth and said unto Jesus, Good Master, what good thing shall I do that I may have eternal life? And he, meaning Jesus, he said unto him, Why callest me good? There is none good but one, and that is God. But if thou wilt enter into life, keep the commandments. He saith unto him, Thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt commit no adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. Honor thy father and thy mother, and love thy neighbor as thyself. And the young man said, All these things I have done. What lack I yet? And Jesus said unto him, listen closely. I part about it. Listen closely. If thou wilt be perfect, go and sell that thou hast, and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me. So there it is. If you want to do what Jesus tells you to do, for all of you good, faithful Christians out there, I will repeat that. Sell what thou hast and give to the poor. If you need any help giving away your possessions, let me know. I'll be glad to assist you in that project. And if I get any calls, I do have to give you credit. You'll be the first person of any description, Christian or otherwise, who has sold everything that thou hast and given it to the poor, which is another reason why, if you try to live by the New Testament, they'd put you in an insane asylum. That's today's Bible reading with comment.
This is why I never understand people who assert that our country was founded on Christian values, because the only form of government that is defined in Christianity is a kingdom, and the economic system would probably most closely resemble either pure socialism or outright communism. Maybe not necessarily communism, because they don't allow capital investment, and the government wants to pretty much run all of the major industries. But still, the idea of capitalism, where few people have enormous percentage of the wealth and the vast majority has very little wealth, would certainly be totally contrary to what you just explained to us is in the Bible, in the fundamental foundation of Christian religion. It's almost
impossible for a rich man to get into heaven. The Bible tells us that.
We talked a little earlier about the governor and his stand on protests. Well, on Monday, he pointed to these abortion right protesters outside the houses of the Supreme Court judges as he announced signing a measure intended to prevent picketing and protests outside people's homes. The bill was approved by state lawmakers in March, undoubtedly by the Republicans, and it's going to take effect October 1st. This bill will make it illegal to protest outside a person's home, quote, with the intent to harass or disturb that person in his or her dwelling, unquote, which is kind of the whole point of protesting, to let that person know that you don't like what they've done, which is the fundamental element of the First Amendment. Mm-hmm. Your right to redress government. Now, he's saying, well, you can't do it at their home. You got to go to the courthouse, like they're going to even know you're there. Right now, they put a great big wall around the courthouse to insulate them.
Unscalable fence.
But listen to this, Joe. It allows law enforcement officers to charge people with second-degree misdemeanors if they don't peaceably disperse after being warned about protesting. So I guess what that means is if the cops warn them to disperse, they should throw bricks and Molotov cocktails and violently disperse, and then they'll be okay. Is that how you interpret that? I'm not sure.
Sure.
In a prepared statement, here's what the governor said. Sending unruly mobs to private residences, like we have seen with the angry crowds in front of the homes of Supreme Court justices, is inappropriate.
None of those are, I haven't heard any reports of any damage, gunfire, anyone harmed, even any threats.
And who does he assert sent them there? They went there because they're citizens of this country, seeing their rights being trampled on. Nobody sent them to the houses. They went there because they're concerned citizens. And don't you wonder, Joe, why wasn't a bill like that introduced after January 6th? Now, that was an unruly, violent mob. They don't seem to have any problem with that. If it has the potential to result in overturning a legitimate election, that's just fine. But if they go stand in a sidewalk, which is a public domain,
Right, it doesn't make it illegal to demonstrate inside their house, which I guess is an invitation to open the door. Here I come.
And that's what's coming next. It's going to be illegal to protest anything the governor does. If you don't believe me, ask the Walt Disney Company. Right? I mean, he just goes right to work on them and punishes anybody who speaks out against his policies. And they call this America. Well, that's great. It's not going to be much longer.
Harper's Index for this month. The percentage of Americans who think the Supreme Court acts in a serious and constitutionally sound manner, 37%. The percentage of Americans who cannot name a case decided by the Supreme Court, 46%.
Wow.
At least give me Plessy versus Ferguson, right?
Yeah.
Mayberry versus Madison, one of those at least.
I know. And I know Clarence Thomas has always been interested in reversing Roe Wade. He wants to call it Wade versus Roe now. So he's working.
He thinks it's two different ways to cross the Rio Grande.
Well, now here's something else that the governor's doing. And this just came out today. He's taken aim at the libel laws. This item right on the front of the paper today says he wants to challenge decades-old First Amendment protections for the news media and make it easier for high-profile people to win defamation lawsuits. Right? So he's saying if you criticize me, I can sue you now and cost you all kinds of money. The taxpayers will pay for it. So he's trying to shut down criticism. That's just
I can sue newspapers. I can sue teachers. I can sue schools. I'm just really going to have to go back to law school. I don't see where I have any choice in the matter.
And then the other thing he's doing is he's increasing the embargoes on Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is he doing that? He says, because if we engage in free trade with Cuba, then all the money will go into the pockets of the dictators instead of the people, right? And so we've seen that embargoes are extremely effective. I mean, just because it's been under embargo for 50 years and it hasn't nudged the government away from communism doesn't mean it failed, does it, Joe?
Well, you can see how well it's working in Russia at this very moment.
But why doesn't he advocate an embargo against China? That's a totally communist country.
Mm-hmm.
Has all the same attributes that Cuba does, a one-party system.
Human rights disaster.
They call it a dictatorship. But did you, and the answer is because if we put an embargo on China, our economy would collapse within hours. And we all know that. Because we are part of really an international economy now. We just can't go back to where we were in the 50s, where we produce and sell everything internally or export things. It just doesn't work that way anymore.
Well, that plus we've gone to a just-in-time warehouse system. So instead of having a warehouse full of spare parts and supplies, you pick up the phone because the logistics are so good that they can be here in a matter of hours or a day or two. And of course, that system is severely under duress at the moment.
That's right. So why is Biden being blamed? Because that system evolved out of the free market.
Right, long before he hit that.
Yeah, right. Why do you want to have money tied up in your raw materials?
And why don't you blame the invisible hand?
Yeah, they were talking this morning how China apparently some Chinese company owns the port of Los Angeles.
I heard that on the show.
Why is Biden then getting blamed if they're the ones that are controlling the import of raw materials or completed products from China? It's not his fault. In fact, inflation is worldwide. I was just reading in the New Yorker about Turkey, 70% inflation they have over there. They would kill for 8% inflation, right?
UK has the highest inflation rate since, in the last 50 years.
Yeah. But see, I think the whole reason we keep this embargo against Cuba active is because we don't want a communist country to thrive right off the coast of Florida, because the conservatives always want to be able to point to Cuba and say, see, communism doesn't work. Well, if Florida was cut off from trade from the rest of the country, we'd
Wouldn't work either.
pretty much in the same, how many oranges can you eat? All the theme parks would shut down. But they never point to China. Why? Because China's economy is about to surpass ours, strictly because of the size of the workforce that they have. They just outnumber us 4-1. China has 698 billionaires. United States has 724. There's 140 in India, which is the world's largest democracy, but they have a comparable population to China, and they don't have as many. They got 140 billionaires. China has 600 and almost 700 now.
Not bad
As
for a
of last
communist,
count. Yeah.
where everybody's supposed to have the same thing.
They point to Venezuela, say, oh, that's a socialist country. That's why it's failing. Venezuela is a federal presidential democratic republic where the president is the head of state and government as well. The president exercises executive powers while the National Assembly controls legislative power. That doesn't sound like a dictatorship to me. The Supreme Tribunal of Justice heads the judiciary. The National Assembly of Venezuela has 165 representatives elected through a mixed member majoritarian system. Elections take place both at state and local levels. The country has a multi-party system which allows for many parties to form and vie for any seat they wish. That's not communism. It's not socialism. It's just a poorly run country because one guy got in power.
Well, and so many people are confused by what is an economic system and what is a political system.
Exactly.
And it's been
Just where I was
unfortunate
going.
that the countries that have adopted communism have been despotic as well in most cases. And the result is that it appears the communists are anti-humanist, that they have mass killings and incarcerations and all of the things that go with very oppressive dictatorships. That has been the case, but it hasn't been the case because of the economic system. It's been the case because of the political system. And as we have said many times, that doesn't mean that there aren't some facets to it that are worth studying, adapting, or adopting.
Right. And our Constitution doesn't mandate any kind of an economic system.
That's right.
So we can take parts of any systems and incorporate them, whatever works best for our people. We always seem to think that this capitalism is the only functional system, and yet when we look back on what happened over just the last 100 years, it plunged us into a crushing depression 90 years ago. 25% unemployment, long bread lines and soup lines. Workers just couldn't get jobs. Why is that so good? And yet I think that's kind of what led or helped lead Marx to thinking about trying to find a system that distributed the wealth more equitably among the workers and the corporate bosses, not to create some kind of a gulag dictatorship, but to more evenly distribute the wealth and try to put them on an economic system that wasn't so cyclical between boom and bust. And we've demonstrated that we can't do that because we're now talking about going into another recession. We had one back just in 2007 and 2008. Our system is always cyclical. And what's wrong with trying to put a stop to that? You tell me.
I don't see any problem with doing away with
but
cyclical suffering.
Going back to Cuba, remember that what brought about the revolution back in, was it 59 when Castro came to power?
59 or 60.
Yeah, they were then a
New
free
Year's
market
Day.
system. And the country was being so exploited by American businesses and the American mafia that it was just basically plundering that country. And Batista was, of course, getting wealthy
He
by
left. When he fled the country, he took $1 billion.
just like the Shah of Iran.
Incredible amount of money.
He'd been put in power by us just like the Shah of Iran and just like Allende in Chile when he was voted in as a communist because they wanted more equal distribution of wealth down there. The CIA went down and assassinated him. They said, we're not going to let you guys have a communist country. It's up to us to decide how your country's going to function. Castro had the backing of the people because he threw all those corporations out. And if we had not embargoed that country, which Kennedy was probably in the process of reversing that so that they could function as a free market country if they wanted to, which they would have, then it would have been a much more successful country from within. And so now by holding back the trade, all we're doing is making these people suffer for generations.
Well, in spite of their suffering, the consensus is that they're still better off than they were under Batista. So in spite of the enforced poverty brought on by the U.S.'s actions, the average Cuban is better educated, has better health care, spends fewer back-breaking hours picking sugarcane, which is one of the most unpleasant jobs on the planet. And the country is generally better off in spite of 50 years of being deprived of the goods and services that every jerkwater country on the planet gets.
Yeah, so where could they have been if they'd never suffered from an embargo? They could be a very prosperous country just like China.
They could be married to us economically, and that's the solution to the problem.
That's right. So we're just exacerbating the problem by continuing the failed and eternally failing embargoes. Just using it as a false example of the failures of these different isms that could be very functional. They have more physicians per capita than we do. In fact, they export physicians. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure.
I think I've read that. But, and so what we see happening here is a trend to move our country more toward an authoritarian or a fascist country, while we're trying to tell these other countries that are communist that you can't decide for yourself what kind of government you want. We're going to tell you what kind of government you want.
Fear is a prime motivator in the case of the U.S. or in any country that moves to the right. They do so because they're afraid.
Mm-hmm.
They're afraid of economic problems. They're afraid of foreigners. They're afraid of immigrants. They're afraid of military aggression.
And I know we're hearing that
and so forth.
That word fascism thrown around a lot these days, but by definition, common themes among fascist movements include nationalism, including racial nationalism, hierarchy and elitism, militarism, masculinity, and quasi-religion. And those are all the things that I see the conservatives trying to impose on us in this country. An oligarchy is a government in which a small group exercises control, especially for corrupt and selfish purposes. Well, isn't that what we're seeing more of as these decisions like Citizen United allow more and more influence in our government by the corporations that can afford to influence them, so that we'll move toward a country where all of our laws regarding taxation, our business laws, our inheritance laws will favor corporations.
And the court just doubled down on that yesterday when they said Ted Cruz wasn't liable for paying himself back for campaign loans with future donations, which opens the door to unlimited, graft is the word I'm looking for, but corruption.
Yeah, it's just one step at a time that we're moving toward that. And now, of course, all this fear-mongering with the election process and continuing with the big lie on and on and on, when we've demonstrated decisively that through multiple recounts that the election was clean. They keep propagating that lie so that American voters will lose confidence in the election system, and then they can come along and say, well, it just doesn't work, so we've got to let the legislatures make the decision as to who's going to be in power or where the electoral votes are going to be cast for our state, regardless of what the voting public wants. And that's when we become a fascist country, when we lose our right to decide who's running the show anymore. And that's when you're going to see the real major changes, like the reversal of the Social Security Act or the elimination of that, or maybe Medicare. Instead of expanding it to Medicare to all, restrict it to Medicare for the rich. That's where we're going with all of this.
Medicare for the healthy.
And I just wanted to mention that the government spent $2.5 million to repair over 3,000 breaches in the border wall during the 2019-2021 fiscal years. They've had that many breaches over the past 3 years. And I'm guessing only one person comes every time they cut through the wall. Right? They cut through the base of it and swing it open. And just...
They just discovered some tunnel with air conditioning, lights, food, railroad tracks. It runs all the way from Tijuana to San Diego.
And these are just the tunnels they discovered.
Yeah, right.
Who knows how many are down there that haven't been found yet? So this obsession with the border wall is just a false narrative. It's the only way to stop illegal immigration is to fine the employers, but they're not going to do that. Well, if you have comments, you can reach us at WTANvoice@AOL.com. Our quote today is from Sinclair Lewis, Joe, and he said this: "When fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross." Up next, Patsy, Joy on Paper. And we'll be back next Thursday with another edition of The Voice of Reason, along with Joe Reinhardt, Ed Golly, reminding you, if the statement seems a little too implausible to be true, don't believe it just because a conservative said it.
Call your Supreme Court justice and ask them.
WTAN, Clearwater.
FM 106.1.
WDCF, Dade City.
FM 102.3.
WZHR, Zephyr Hills.
FM 104.3.
Listen.